Welcome to Whose Narratives from Nakba to Gaza, Genocide, Resistance, and International Feminist Solidarities. I'm Tomomi Kinakawa, lecturer at San Francisco State University. Today is the 76th anniversary of the 1948 Nakba, the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians and the ongoing violent dispossession of Palestinian land and its peoples. National Women's Studies Association, NWSA, and Feminists for Justice for Palestine, F4JP, have partnered to offer a virtual open classroom discussion on the history of the Nakba, the association's recommitment to Palestine as a feminist issue, and what it means to be an act in feminist solidarity in the movement for free Palestine. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that our university campus, San Francisco State University, occupies the stolen, unceded indigenous land of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples who continue to live on this land and experience continued acts of displacement. The students and faculty at the university benefit from the occupation of the land, and we have a responsibility to bring this experience into our discussions on imperialism and occupation and the commitment to defeat the settler colonial project in the US. Dr. Hadi?
I think Dr. Lorber is next.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being with us. Before we begin our program, we're going to take a moment to honor all of the martyrs in all periods of the Israeli colonization of Palestine, from before the Nakba of 1948 through to today. And so I want to take a moment just to note, in the current Israeli-US genocide that's underway in Gaza, we don't have assurance of all of the numbers of people who have been martyred. But from the Euromed Human Rights Monitor, the current estimates are that 43,640 people have been martyred, that 81,560 people have been injured. And this includes 141 journalists who have been killed, 371 healthcare professionals that have been killed, and 560 that have been injured. And this is in addition to, thousands of destroyed industrial and healthcare facilities, more than 600 destroyed mosques, more than 200 destroyed heritage sites, more than 2 million people displaced, and more than 3,000 people detained or forcibly disappeared. In this urgent and difficult time for Gaza and for all of Palestine, we want to have a moment of silence to honor and to mourn, to grieve these martyrs in Palestine and around the world. So please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Dr. Abdul Hadi, will you lead us in a land acknowledgement?
Yes, I wanted to follow up by saying that as a Palestinian, indigenous Palestinian, we also honor the land acknowledgement of all the people in Turtle Island and around the world who are colonized, occupied. We support the liberation of everybody from settler colonialism, as we do the same thing in Palestine. And we insist that anybody who comes to Palestine, whether coming as a visitor, in solidarity, international agencies, have to be validated by the Palestinians. Their presence have to be validated by the Palestinians in order to avoid being called settlers. So this is really important to all of us to do that. And we are asking the audience to please, when you sign in, just say where you're joining from and what your name and what you're doing. And I'm going to pass it over now to Dr. Mary Jo, right? Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mary Jo Klinker, and I'm speaking to you from the indigenous homelands of the Dakota people in Winona, Minnesota. I want to, as a faculty member and as I share space with other faculty, recognize the courageous perseverance of students and faculty demanding divestment on their college campuses in solidarity with Palestine and in opposition to genocide, in many cases amidst state violence. A student encampment has emerged on every continent, and this week, students at Berzate University in the occupied West Bank have joined protesters around the world and are demanding an end to settler colonization, apartheid, and genocide. In this moment, I want to lift up briefly the May 1st letter from presidents of Palestinian universities in which they state, quote, "Your protests erupt and give hope for humanity, that justice is not an abstract concept, but a continuous struggle that connects us all. Your values are emancipating the university from structural racism and complicity with power and colonization," end quote. As such, we are here today committed in solidarity with the struggle for Palestine and in the fight against continued imperialism. Thank you for sharing space with us today.
My colleague, Dr. Natanya Ampulli, reminds us that acknowledgements are acts of honoring, blessing, celebrating, and thanking. So first and foremost, in solidarity with our indigenous relatives in Palestine, the Congo, Turtle Island, the Sudan, and all communities facing genocide and displacement, I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking from Colorado Springs, the unceded territory of the Ute peoples that has been developed with stolen and exploited labor. Next, I want to thank everyone who played a significant role in making this possible. I want to thank everyone in attendance today, and I want to thank those of you who will be watching at a later time. It is an honor and a privilege for me to share this space with you. In my capacity as the 22nd president of the National Women's Studies Association, or NWSA, I'll be conducting an abbreviated reading from our most recent statement, Recommitting to BDS and to Feminist Accountability, a collaborative effort between our governing council, our national office, and our Feminists for Justice in and for Palestine Caucus, or F4JP. To read the statement in its entirety, please visit our new and improved website at www.nwsa.org. On the heels of a brutal bombardment of Gaza, when the Israeli army killed more than 2,000 people, many of our members issued a petition calling on NWSA to adopt a BDS resolution in 2014. While the petition was signed by nearly 1,000 members, an official stance was not adopted due to association bylaws. That changed the following year. Led by Dr. Abdulhadi and several others, members presented a resolution for consideration in 2015. The resolution passed, F4JP was formed, and an NWSA statement calling for the support of academic freedom, political dissent, and the pursuit of education and research without undue state interference or repression was published. Shortly before our annual conference in 2022, however, our then president and interim executive director visited Israel for, and I quote, religious and familial reasons. While she issued an initial apology and released statements on Palestine, early communique fell short of demonstrating an understanding about the ways colonial and religious tourism fuels Christian Zionism, and committing to accountability for complicity with Israeli colonization. For example, the impetus for the justifiable outrage expressed by members of F4JP, as well as numerous Palestinian and non-Palestinian members, was situated as a mere difference in perception. However, that outrage was not a result of differences in perception. Rather, that outrage was catalyzed by solidarity with people struggling against colonization, military occupation, and indigenous genocide. Nevertheless, members of F4JP maintained a steadfast commitment to continued collaboration with NWSA, evidenced especially by their statement calling on NWSA to reaffirm its commitment to Palestinian liberation, BDS, and feminism. Still, these and other calls for accountability were largely ignored or met with hostility. While the board issued nearly 30 statements during the previous president's term, we never published a statement calling for accountability within our own ranks regarding our commitment to justice in and for Palestine. For example, regarding our May 2023 statement commemorating the 75th anniversary of the Nakba, NWSA failed to meaningfully consult with Palestinian intellectuals within and beyond membership before publishing. As a result, BDS was misnamed, and the apartheid occupation of Palestine was referenced as the annexing of Palestinian land. Similarly, our July 2023 newsletter egregiously conflated anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. F4JP then withdrew from our most recent conference last fall, and a number of other members withdrew in solidarity and protest. The two subsequent statements issued by the association, one calling for a ceasefire and another calling for an end to Israel's war on Gaza, were too little, too late. As soon as I assumed leadership last October, I contacted F4JP in an effort to recommit the association to BDS and feminist accountability. In January 2024, F4JP met with me, Dr. Christian Contreras, our interim executive director, and the governing council to share their concerns about the conference and other harms perpetrated by association leadership. For example, the genocidal war on Gaza was only mentioned at the end of the opening plenary in a video submitted by Dr. Angela Davis, and Dr. Abdullahi was removed from the NWSA website as F4JP co-chair in 2022. Fortunately, we also learned several F4JP suggestions for accountability were congruent with my already existing plans for collaboratively addressing and repairing these and other harms. Shortly after the aforementioned meeting, I published my 2-year strategic plan entitled Reconnect, Repair, Restore, a more thoughtful, transparent, and trustworthy NWSA. I introduced it in part by acknowledging the violation of BDS and taking accountability for my part in exacerbating these and other harms as NWSA secretary. As content leader for our upcoming conference in Detroit, I committed to a plenary focused on Palestine and a presidential session focused on transnational feminist analyses of imperialism, war, and occupation, which is also a conference sub-theme. I focused my inaugural presidential blog on Palestine and the Black radical intellectual tradition. And thanks to my colleague and friend, Dr. Donna Olwan, I was able to more substantially connect with the Palestinian Feminist Collective, resulting, at least in part, in Hawaida Araf agreeing to be our conference co-chair. Yet, and as always, there's more work to do. And above all else, we remain committed to building and maintaining thoughtful, transparent, and trustworthy relationships, especially but not only in times of crisis. We understandably grow weary from studying and resisting sexism, racism, trans-antagonism, colonialism, and other forms of subjugation and oppression. Still, we maintain our commitments with as much joy as we can muster because we remember what Grace Lee Boggs taught us, which is that movements are born of critical connections rather than critical mass. In this vein, we sit with the complexity of what repair and true solidarity looks like, not just in abstraction, but in practice, with a sense of urgency to respond to and stop the current Israeli genocide in Gaza, as well as the need to listen, discuss, and engage in long-term and deep solidarities. We engage with accountability and intentionality in lieu of short-term gains and quick fixes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As a member of Feminists for Justice in and for Palestine, as members of Feminists for Justice in and for Palestine, we'd like to welcome everyone and also contextualize this open classroom. And we'd like to raise the question of who are Feminists for Justice in and for Palestine. And I'd like to start briefly commenting on silencing and erasure of Ahmed's studies and teaching Palestine at San Francisco State University. We are gathered today in an Ahmed open classroom and teaching in the program teaching Palestine, which has been under attack over decades. And Dr. Abdul Hadi has been defending the program like with many both personal and professional sacrifices. And it is very much critical for us to be holding this open classroom while the administration of SFSU is not yet made accountable for its collusion with Zionists and their role in advocating and normalizing Zionist colonial narratives under the multiple pretexts of like bureaucracy, false use of academic freedom, and so forth. And the colonial silencing of Palestine indigenous narratives, the truth, and raising Nakba continue at our institution at SFSU. And right now we are fighting to demand the administration to restate the Dr. Abdul Hadi's course on Palestine for this summer, which they canceled in the midst of the genocide. And this is only the most recent example of the consistent attacks on Ahmed's studies by the San Francisco State University administration, which has attempted to dismantle the Ahmed studies itself and isolate Dr. Abdul Hadi and prevent Ahmed to have its own self-determination and operate as an independent program. And when Dr. Abdul Hadi and I co-organized our open classroom, whose narratives, gender justice and resistance conversation with Leila Khaled in fall 2020, we were to centralize Palestinian anti-colonial feminist narratives and to liberate Leila Khaled's life and work and many other Palestinian feminists from Zionist epistemic violence. The open classroom was shut down, however, by Zionist organizations, corporate media such as Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, and CSU administration. And both Dr. Abdul Hadi and I filed grievances to CSU, and then randomly selected faculty hearing committees ruled unanimously in favor of both of our grievances and stated that CSU administration violated our academic freedom and let the outside organizations censor the content of our classes. President Mahoney, however, rejected the committee's decisions, forcing us to take the case to arbitration. And we just had the arbitration hearing in that our lawyers put together a very powerful case against the CSU. Essentially, CSU let the Zoom accuse us for material support for terrorism and shut down the class. And while CSU knew that the accusation is far-fetched, they didn't tell us, and they instead intimidated us by saying that we need to seek legal legal help, and there's a possibility of imprisonment and so forth, while offering us no support. And and not only that, but the CSA, SFSU repeated the Zionist epistemic violence, and they attempted to normalize their narrative, which counters what we were trying to do in our open classroom, and that they repeated the same violence during the arbitration hearing. So that is what we are fighting for, and this open classroom is very much critical in our fight. So I would like to hand this to my colleague.
Thank you so much, Tamami. I can follow up. I just want to begin thanking Heidi for sharing her powerful statement and urgent feminist praxis today. I'm a member of Feminists for Justice in and for Palestine, which is a collective that was central to organizing and implementation of boycott, divestment, and sanctions in the National Women's Studies Association in 2015. I just briefly would like to share a moment of that activist archive with us today. In 2014, Feminists for Justice in and for Palestine, not yet organized as a collective, began the work to demand BDS and NWSA under Dr. Rabab Abdelhadi's leadership. At the annual conference in Puerto Rico, we gathered over 800 signatures in 24 hours. That same weekend, more than 2,000 people attended Bell Hook's plenary talk, and Rabab asked her in the Q&A, "Do you think that this is a place that we should do something for Palestine?" And Bell Hook said 100%. As Rabab has recounted, quote, "The ground was shaking," end quote. It was a historic moment. As Heidi has shared, in the summer of 2023, we collectively published a call on NWSA to reaffirm its unwavering commitment to Palestinian liberation and feminism in Mondoweiss, documenting that NWSA had crossed the academic picket line in violation with the organization's 2015 BDS resolution. For this reason, we withheld from attendance in the 2023 National NWSA conference. Since that time, we've continued our work to strengthen and protect BDS in the sites we inhabit, and have committed to repair and accountability work with the current NWSA leadership, as we collectively believe that BDS is a material practice of international feminist solidarity, which we must all engage in at this very moment. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brooke Lober, and I'm a lecturer in gender and women's studies at UC Berkeley and also at Sonoma State University. And I'm also a member of the collective Feminists for Justice in and for Palestine, and where we've supported the National Women's Studies Association's signing and ongoing commitment to boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and more broadly, to feminist studies for Palestine as a commitment of the organization, of our field of scholarship, and of feminist, queer, and trans movements and all movements for gender justice. In this moment, it's especially important for feminists to regroup and consider the historical moment that we're in. And this includes fortifying our understanding of not only the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, but also the sleight of hand or the tactic through which Zionist forces attempt to substitute anti-Semitism, which is historically a hatred of Jewish people and violence against Jewish people that has materialized principally in European history and in white supremacist formations, for anti-Zionism, which is a movement for a collective movement for the liberation of Palestinian people. This recognition and recommitment to feminist anti-Zionism is in keeping with a broad feminist project to support anti-colonial and Native feminist studies and feminist practices. In order to fortify our resistance, our feminist resistance against oppression, and to address all intersecting forms of power, feminists must recommit to and regroup around struggles against settler colonialism. This has a history in feminist studies, that I want to briefly name. More than 10 years ago, as Native feminist theories became more central in intersectional feminist studies, Maylee Arvin, Eve Tuck, and Angie Morrill wrote, as feminism and gender and women's studies continue to grow as political and scholarly projects, their future is dependent on a willingness to not just include Native feminist theories as a specialized subfield, but instead to re-examine and rewrite the very terms by which they operate. If such a rewriting is accomplished, feminism might realign its end goals toward dismantling not just heteropatriarchy, but also the settler colonial nation states that heteropatriarchy upholds, and will achieve not only gender parity, but also decolonization. End quote. The acknowledgement of the Nakba and indigenous erasure is foundational to any perspective, any feminist perspective on Zionism. And in solidarity with indigeneity and with decolonization across the globe, feminism is and must be foundationally and necessarily anti-Zionist. And I'm grateful to be a part of the process through which the NWSA, among other feminist, queer, and trans scholarly and activist entities, are recommitting to the struggle against colonialism in all its forms.
Salamat and Masa al Khair, Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I'm going to just give a brief response to Dr. Heidi Lewis and continue with our program. I wanted to say that historically, before I even thank Dr. Lewis and the new board, historically, women's studies in the United States in particular has had adopted a white supremacist perspective and the perspective of white feminism and liberal feminism. Part of the problem is that when you say feminism, it implies something progressive, something good. So that has been a very big problem in the sense also of isolating not only indigenous and women of color, Black women, and so on, from the time of the Seneca Fall Convention to the present time, but also completely isolating and keeping out Palestinians and other women who are involved in liberation movements around the world under the pretext that we are nationalists, but we're not true feminists, and which is a very problematic formula. But also there has been a domination of Zionism over the women's studies in general, women's studies in general, and National Women's Studies Association, until the browning of NWSA started happening little by little, which I've shared in my analysis has had, along with the fact that we were meeting in Puerto Rico in 2014, and the fact that the latest at the time genocidal war against Gaza by Israel in 2014 has just concluded, and we were so horrified. We thought actually nothing like this could ever happen again, and now we see that it has surpassed all sorts of magnitudes. In 2015, after we passed the resolution in 2014, as Dr. Lewis shared, we were in the Milwaukee conference and we had to meet in the same hotel where the escalators and the elevators had pictures of Golda Meir, who said there are no Palestinians, who said that she has a nightmare whenever a Palestinian child will be born, and she also made a lot of racist statements in the sense that she said that she hates Palestinians not only because they kill Israeli soldiers, but because they force us, meaning Israelis, to kill them, meaning engaging in this quote unquote civilizational moment that Israeli or Jewish supremacy is above and superior to Palestinians and other people. We continue to be marginalized, and even after the passage of the resolution in 2015 for several years, but in 5 years after the resolution, we held a lot of panels in the San Francisco conference in 2019, which was the last one before COVID. One of the panels was called From Margin to Center, honoring Bell Hooks. She was still alive at that time. She passed. May she rest in power. And also about 5 years after the BDS, and renewed it. And we were actually on the path to improving things more and more until what Dr. Lewis spoke about, the past president crossed the picket line, went to Israel, validated Christian Zionism basically, and validated Zionism. NWSA also last year before this new change, this very new and welcome change we've seen, also issued a statement in July, basically validating, saying that feminism needs to be free of anti-Zionism, which was very problematic for everybody, not only Palestinians. Feminists for Justice in Palestine, as Dr. Lewis said, we basically decided that we cannot participate under these conditions. We actually asked for a statement. The statement was not forthcoming. It was not appropriate by Dr. K. And then all the incursion and the harm continued happening. It was really difficult times. And I want to say that it was very difficult. We felt very marginalized. We felt we were gaslighted. We felt that we were isolated. A lot of the times we were even questioned whether we are, how many Palestinians do you have amongst you and so on, which goes contrary to the whole principle of Feminists for Justice and for Palestine, because it's part of the indivisibility of justice. We do not believe that, we believe that we're gelling around the program, about the program of justice for Palestine, about the program of justice for all. So we're not talking about how many, what identity politics, how many Palestinians, how many not, and so on. And we were pressured to actually stop this. But we insisted, and we did not boycott the conference. Last conference in November 2023, we just said that we're not going to show up, partly because it was very important to support the National Women's Studies Association membership and body and community to participate and so on. And the thing that, so we just withdrew. We didn't participate. We said that we're not going to participate. There were many other harms happening, but I think the most important thing that I want to just spend a couple of moments at is that the election of the new board under the leadership of Dr. Lewis and with the executive director, Christian Contreras, and the other members of the board, who actually took very seriously our criticism and did not brush it aside, did not brush it under the rug as other people do, but actually faced it head on and acknowledged the harm that was done, pushed out all the statements that Dr. Lewis has spoken about, and made us feel that we can come back to NWSA and work hand in hand with our colleagues, with our comrades, with our sisters, with our siblings in NWSA, in order for us to carve a different way of thinking about it, including addressing the different marginalized communities, not only Palestine, but Kashmir, Puerto Rico, Guam, all the areas that have been Dalit, all the areas that have not historically been seen as part of the center of NWSA. So actually moving them to the center. And we requested certain things, and every single request that we've requested has been responded to positively. So in addition to the plenary, the Palestinian plenary, the presidential panel, selecting Dr. Arraf as the co-chair of the conference, we also requested a delegation, NWSA, that would sponsor officially a delegation to Palestine, which was also included. And we also agreed to do a series of events, open classroom. This is the first one that we're doing together, and we are going to doing many more. And then finally is to organize during the conference an institute on teaching gender and sexual justice in Arab, Palestinian, Muslim communities, which we will be talking about later on. This has been incredibly a very wonderful development, and a development that really showed how to model basically standing up for what's right, owning up when things are wrong, and working together, and accepting to working together and insisting to work together to actually engage in critical solidarity. So we are very happy that we were able to actually get to this point, and we agreed that we are going to do our first event on Nakba anniversary because of the blunders that were caused last year at the 75th anniversary on Nakba. And we decided to select speakers from NWSA, from participants in this, from the NWSA, from Feminists for Justice and for Palestine, because we are a collective, and also invite our Palestinian speakers, Jihan Al-Hilu, who has been organizing and resisting for a very, very long time in the Palestinian movement, continues to do so. Malak Matar, who's an amazing artist from Gaza, who has been writing again and again, actually refused to go to the conference last year, respected our withdrawal and did so. We were hoping to have Dr. Nada Elia, but she wasn't available today. However, she is going to be speaking at the Detroit conference. And we also asked for Dr. Lina Maari, who's from the Institute for Women and Gender and Women's Studies at Birzeit University. However, Dr. Maari, right before we started, messaged me saying that a student at Birzeit University has just been martyred. He is Aysar Safi. His father and brother are prisoners. They've just shared with us Right to Education campaign from Birzeit, a video that we will post so everybody can actually see it. And then, of course, last but not least is Huwaida Arraf, who has just returned from the flotilla. The speakers complete each other. Each one complement the discussion and so on. And we're very happy to have you here. And this is just the beginning of our work with each other. So I'm going to pass it on. And basically now, this coming round, we are going to be collectively, it's going to be collectively moderated. Each speaker is going to have 5 to 7 minutes, and the co-moderators will present the questions, and the presenters will answer. Then we will have another round, and we will start. I think we were going to start with the Jihan, but we were told that Malak Matar has an appointment at 7 p.m. in London and has to go, and we are very grateful to her. So we will actually start with Malak in order to hear from her, and of course we're going to have you many more times to discuss more, Malak. So I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Mary Jo Klinker.
Thank you so much for sharing space with us and providing your time and knowledge today. For today's conversation, you generously provided us with this painting that is now being shown. Can you tell us about the elements and meaning of the piece and its relation to Gaza?
I'd first love to thank you for having me, and thank you, Dr. Rabab, and for also including me in this important session. I wanted to say that these painting, when I look at them, I feel nostalgic because I no longer use painting. I no longer use color the way I did for the past 10 years. I only now paint with black. Because it's such a very dark and bleak time. When I talk about Nakba, I don't only talk about a sad date, or for me, it feels much more personal. I remember I was going into school as a young student, and I was asked alongside 40, 50 students to write our city and or village of origin. And I, without any hesitation, I just wrote Gaza because it's the place I was born in. And then I looked around me, and there was nobody from Gaza. So we were all refugees in an UNRWA school. So for me, I had a question like, where do I come from? So I went and I asked my grandparents. And although I didn't comprehend as a 6-year-old what all the suffering and the struggle, I just can never forget how the eyes of my grandparents changed when they narrated their forced displacement in 1948. They came from Al Jora village. So every year in Gaza, we commemorated Nakba, which was a very, very depressing day. We would commemorate it with poetry, with national anthem, with testimonies from the survivors of Nakba. So for me, seeing where we are at the moment, and thinking that 1948 was the worst thing that ever happened, and now looking at the erasure of the Gaza Strip, it's extremely difficult to comprehend. But so, like in 2008, I was going to my school. So I want to give context to the painting that you've seen in the screen. And to give a bit of context, I was only 8 years old. I was going to my school for my final exam. And suddenly we were pushed outside of the schools. And it's like it's a war. So for me, school is always connected to war. And then as we left, it was a surreal scene. We were hundreds of students wearing the outfit, like the UNRWA outfit, and some of us knew where to go, and some did not go where to go. It was such a horrifying time, and all the time I was thinking when I will do my exam next. So that was my first time being survivor. The second in 2012, the third 2014, which was a genocide, and it's the date that made me an artist. I was pushed into making art as a way of letting things go, especially seeing scattered bodies in front of me. The body of my neighbor, she was she was an old, lovely woman uh, with a very sweet memories. I saw her being shattered into pieces. So art was my way of just letting things go. And then in 2021, I became a fourth survivor, 2022. And I left prior to the 2023, in the 7th of October, 2 days prior, to pursue my studies in London, leaving behind family, friends, whom a lot of them did not survive. And part of my rage, I have so much rage within myself. Not only how the world is letting a genocide happen for its seventh month, but it's also how did you allow 2008 to happen? How did you allow a war to be experienced on a population, half of it were children? So I will never forget, not only this time, but how every time you did nothing, like the world did nothing about making this stop, about the military blockade, which has killed us slowly every single day. The fact that we are not able to get medication, the fact that we're not able to leave to meet the loved ones, it was extremely inhumane conditions that we were subjected to during the military blockade, but also, you know, the unpredictability of another series of bombardments. So, this painting that I did of the woman and two children, and behind it, it's a poetry of Mahmoud Darwish. Mahmoud Darwish has been very significant in building our identity as Palestinians, as especially young generation. Growing up, the Palestinian curriculum focused so much on literature. So also focused on women. Fadwa Tuqan, Samira Azzam as a short story writer. So growing up, we grew up with so much literature and art, which I'm so thankful, because I had this somehow a foundation of art thanks to school. So this, I remember painting this in 2019, following the atrocities of the settlers, who were stealing the houses of Palestinians, pushing them away. So it was a response of a house theft, which unfortunately is what's going on, which is the continuing ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. So lastly, I would like to end about, the role of artists during these times. And I think the role of artists, while a lot of artists are not policy makers, they are voices. So I do believe that when you are a witness, you have this responsibility to be a voice, because if you don't speak, somebody else will speak on your behalf. And I do also believe, as a witness of all these series of aggressions and bombardments, I do believe in the power of my witnesses, on the power of my family and friends, of power of Rifat al-Ara'ir, and the power of the artists like Hiba Zaqoud, Dunyan al-Amour, Muhammad Sami, who some of them were just my age. So I do believe on artists being voices, but also documentation. Art will not make any change. I don't believe it will change something, or it will do like a ceasefire. But I do believe that documentation is power, and I do believe when we document something that later becomes an archives, it really helps us use art as a reference, a historical references for the future. Because when I look at Sliman Mansour, I connect with the time that I never lived in. When I look at the Jabal al-Mahamil, when I look at the work of Tamam al-Akhal and her displacement in Yafa, how she visually depicted this with the boats and families coming out, how, Sabra and Shatila was depicted throughout the artwork, throughout the visual creations of these artists. I do feel closer to Palestine. I do feel closer and more committed to my cause. So I do believe art connects generation. And that's why I believe strongly in art. And I'm continuing to do. Yes, my colors have disappeared. And I have said it, the world has drained my colors, but the colors will come back, because they will never break our spirits. Even if they kill our bodies, we will always rise, because we will never let them win or get us broken. So thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Malik. I'm going to take a moment and just ask a question for our next speaker, Dr. Jehan Helu. And so the question that we have for you, Dr. Helu, is that you've said that you're older than the state of Israel. And we're hoping that from that perspective, you can share your own thoughts on what the Nakba means to Palestinians, but also to Palestinian feminists and to people of conscience around the world. Can you share with us your analysis and also the role and experiences you've played in the Palestinian struggle? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for having this opportunity. Being older than Israel is more painful because, as Malak said, this shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't have happened. All these aggressions shouldn't have happened. But this ongoing genocide, this horror shouldn't have happened. But maybe things explain itself. The complicity of culture and education, etc., maybe gave the opportunity to support colonialism and the imperialism that really supported Israel all from the very beginning. I was born in Palestine, and a few years later was uprooted with my family to Lebanon. Of course, we didn't know that this is, that's it. It is settler colonialism and we have no right to return. And we lived the years of dispossession, and when the camps were all ghettos, nobody can go out or do any activity. But the dream of return was always there with every Palestinian. All schemes of settlement were rejected, and Palestinians were looking on the way how to struggle for liberation and to regain Palestine. This took some time, and after 1967, the struggle and the revolution started, and it was really a real liberation for the Palestinians and for the camps, because they thought now they will be liberated from the grip of the intelligence, Lebanese intelligence, and they really were the roots and the main participants in the revolution. And women started to take their role immediately. Before that, of course, Palestinian women were the root of steadfastness, but women were still a grip of some gripping norms that did not allow their participation. But women took their role immediately. They struggled with their society, they struggled with their family, and became instrumental in the Palestinian liberation struggle. And we connected the Palestinian women liberation with the national liberation. We thought a liberation cannot be successful if women were marginalized and didn't take their role. We didn't wait for the men to tell us what to do. And it was a slow struggle, but a very impressive struggle. And you tell me to think what is going now. It is very painful for people who lived from the Nakba 76 years ago to tell them what do they think. I think what's happening shouldn't really have happened. We struggled a lot. We never accepted any settlement. The revolution in Lebanon attracted all the Palestinians, the Arabs, and the international community at the time. At that time, even we had the banner of the Vietnamese revolution. There were many sacrifices. There were, we never gave up. So why are we here today? In Lebanon, we continued the struggle that started in Amman, in Jordan, because always we thought that we need an Arab base for the liberation of Palestine. It cannot be only conducted from inside Palestine with the very, very strong grip of the Israelis of occupation. Though women inside Palestine also gave had a very remarkable role from the very beginning. Many of them were imprisoned, like Aisha Aoudi and Fatma Barnawi and others. Many were martyrs. But the main struggle was in Amman, in Lebanon, in Jordan, and then in Lebanon. And we continued the struggle of Palestinian women that started early in the 20th century. And we were part of the Palestinian factions struggle, and the General Union of Palestinian Women were trying to involve women and to create the atmosphere of her participation. But we never knew that the enemy, the settler colonialists, with the support of the imperialists and with the Arab reaction, will never allow a Palestinian struggle. They conspired to have us uprooted from Jordan, and in Lebanon they conspired to have the civil war so that the fascists had massacres like Tel el-Za'atar and later Sabra and Shatila. And so our struggle was very, very difficult, but we never gave in. It took Israel to have their army invade South Lebanon and then invade Beirut. And they couldn't invade Beirut. They besieged Beirut for 70 days. They couldn't get in, but with all their American weapons, with all their massacres in South Lebanon, in the villages, in the camps, and then inside Lebanon, they were bombarding from sea, air, and land. They couldn't come in, but it took some time just to pressure the Palestinian leadership that if you don't give in, we are going to invade Lebanon. Now it's controversial what should have been done, but the thing is that they thought that they ended the Palestinian struggle. Palestinian women, after the invasion and the Palestinian cadres and leadership left Lebanon, they continued their struggle, and there was remarkable struggle of women in South Lebanon. Some were imprisoned, and they had their remarkable role in building the Ain al-Hilwi camp that was flattened to earth. They had their remarkable role in supporting women who were wife of martyrs or prisoners who had nobody to look after them. They never gave in, and this is why in my book I say women had an important role in the struggle, but we were always in the shadow. We were decision makers because we made things to happen on earth, on the ground, when we defended some of the camps, and we supported the steadfastness of our people. We had our role in the National Council, but not really, not an effective role. It was rather in the decision making. But we believe that the struggle will go on in one way or another. So most of us did not accept that the revolution has ended, and we thought there will be struggle in one way or another. And of course, the Intifada started in the occupied territories. It was great and fantastic. Just supporting that, Palestinians will always find a way of struggling, regardless how suffocating the enemy tries to silence them and to silence their struggle. We understood that it is a settler colonialism, and they will never give in unless we had better support and less from the international community, from the Arab regimes and Arab people, of course, but the Arab people also did not have the freedom to express their support. Unfortunately, Palestinians made peace that most of us refused to accept. The Oslo agreements, we saw that it is a disaster. Most of us, factions and people, rejected it because we thought it is a way of cementing colonialism and settler colonialism in Palestine. And this proved to be true, unfortunately. And this is one reason that made our enemy more powerful and more daring to think that they can do whatever they want if any resistance takes place. The agenda of Zionism was always either we silence Palestinians, we make them go to become invisible as we became for 20 years, or we have to kill them not to allow them to struggle for their liberation, for decolonization, and for the right of return. Can you imagine that now this battle against the UNRWA, it is only because they don't want even the idea of the right of return to be on the agenda, even if it is not feasible now. No Palestinian had the right to return. You know, the main enemy of Israel is the Palestinian people, but also the refugees. In Gaza, it's 70% refugees. Those who are victims, those who are freedom fighters, are the grandchildren of refugees, as Malak spoke. And in the West Bank, all the camps have been a target of a minor genocide. How many times they invaded Jenin, how many times they invaded Nur Shams, Balata, and all. I mean, it has been for several years. The refugees, yani, can you see how bizarre is this? Our enemy, who uprooted us, who made us live in very, very difficult situation. People do not want to leave their camp because it is their replaced village, their identity, etc. And they follow them to the camps with all their mighty army, with all their savagery, with all their genocide plans, because they don't want any refugee. Of course, we connected, maybe we'll talk about it later on. It is, of course, the support, the complicity of colonialism, neo-colonialism. Except of that, Israel cannot really do all these massacres and continue. Now, the Americans are just saying they don't want Rafah. People, 1 million people are in the street. They don't know what to do, where to go. Well, I know of people who are in touch. They do not have a place. They cannot get a tent. A tent is security threat to Israel. They cannot. The food is not reaching them. So, and then the Americans say now we are going to send them arms. They are really complicit, and we are very, very happy, and we really salute the demonstrations around the world, and mostly the university students demonstrations, because for the first time they show that the complicity of culture and education covering for Zionism and not allowing truth and facts to be narrated is really a crime. And now it is, I think I am a little bit hopeful that it is a new era where no more complicity will take place. Our narrative is being known, and we can hope for a better what we want is a democratic state where Jews, Christians, Muslims live together as we lived before 1917 and in even the 30s, etc. So truth to power is very, very important, and knowledge knowledge is the weapon of liberation. And I'm very happy to hear what happened with these cultural and women organizations. I mean, it was a struggle, truth to power, but it was very necessary. And without that, we will not have hope that the colonialists and imperialists will not be weakened and stopped with their atrocities. Decolonization process is very difficult, but I think it has started. But to me, if you say, because I was born before the Nakba, I am living the nightmare like everybody, but to us it's more difficult, because to think after 75 years with all the sacrifices, the all steadfastness, all the remarkable role of women, remarkable role of our people, their patience, their resilience, to have such ongoing genocide, it's heartbreaking. But we have hope. It's starting.
Thank you so much, Professor Jahan. My name is Christian Contreras. I serve the NWSA, or National Women's Studies Association, as its interim executive director. Throughout everyone's conversation and comments so far, it pushes us to take pause. And Professor Jahan, what you shared so beautifully in taking us through all of the different facets of how the occupation and ongoing genocide of Palestine brings up more and more questions reminds me of the Edward Said quote that we as a generation that sparks hope we are galvanized and weaponized by, or we have weapons of criticism and dedicated consciousness. And as we raise consciousness, we begin to ask more questions versus seeking very simple or clear answers, which is the inspiration for hosting a conversation such as this, and for highlighting the incredible ways that women in Palestine and women who have been impacted by the occupation across man-made borders in Lebanon and other sites of resistance push forward the struggle and refusal of being diminished by these powers of coloniality, which then makes me think about the incredible work of Dr. Rabab Abdulahadi, who serves NWSA in different capacities, but is most known for her chairing of our Feminists for Justice in For Palestine collective. And for you, Rabab, if I may, I'd love to ask you to expand on how we can transform conversations where we consider is Palestine a feminist issue, which we know at NWSA in our leadership and in our visioning has always been a feminist issue. How can we shift and grow the conversation around the occupation of Palestine as we commemorate the 76th anniversary of the 1948 Nakba, and all of our conversations around gender, not only in the academy, but in how we organized for a free Palestine?
Thank you so much, Dr. Contreras or Christian. Actually, we met at Syracuse University, right, last year. After the African Studies, African Graduate Student Union and the Black Student Union and the Africana Department invited me to go speak on our way to American Studies Association and Middle East Studies Association in Montreal, and the university administration canceled the lecture, claiming that they are worried about security, but we also found out that they had received a lot of pressure from Zionist students and from Zionist donors. So we all collectively decided to find a different space, and we ended up being at the Peace Center and having actually an event that would have been even more wonderful than the university. We're not letting the university off the hook. They still owe us, and the students at Syracuse are actually having an amazing encampment. And two of them joined us last week, a graduate student, an undergraduate, speaking about the role of the university. So it's really great to be back here. So I'm going to speak about 3 points. One is, how do we think about the narratives around Nakba, and how do we think about them? So there's one of the major things that briefly that I work on is teaching Palestine. Teaching Palestine emphasizes several points that are relevant to our work here. One is, what does commemoration mean? What is the purpose and the goal of commemorations to a people who are colonized? So commemorations, let's say in the US, for example, quote unquote July 4th or Memorial Day or Thanksgiving or so on, are actually used, and in other places the Bastille Day in France actually used now for building the French state against Muslims, Arabs, Africans, other people from former colonized countries by France. They're used in that commemoration in order to mobilize and whip up this. But in anti-colonial struggles, anniversaries are used in a way to actually remind people of what has happened in the past, which my colleague Jehan has amply amplified and spoke about, talking about what happened, both about the massacres and the genocide that Palestinians have been subjected to, and other people around the world, and probably which explains why is it that South Africa actually went to the International Court of Justice for Palestine. It makes perfect sense for us to stand in for each other, and why Jehan is saying that Vietnam was always part and parcel of the Palestinian struggle and other struggles around the world, including the student struggle in the US, the struggle of against white supremacy, against anti-blackness, for black power, for indigenous power, against discrimination against Latinx people, for the liberation of Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and Mexico, and other Latin American and Caribbean countries, and for the struggle against anti-Asian hate, all the issues in the US. This has always been part of it, to think about that. The anniversaries are occasions for us to remember what has happened, to learn about it, to think about it differently, maybe think about the narrative again and what has happened and so on. Establish the narratives of the colonized and reject the erasure of by the Zionists and other settler colonists, white supremacists and so on, to erase us from existence, as my colleague Dr. Kinakawa has spoken about, the joint classroom. So this is one element of teaching Palestine. The other element is, how do we think about things? So, for example, there are certain things in Palestine women's studies, I'd say, and Palestine studies, that I think that should be critiqued around the Nakba. So, for example, there's a lot of widespread thing, very much important to us, that after Nakba, women became the heads of the households because the men were no longer there. That is not true. Not all the Palestinian men disappeared, and not everybody was in prison, and not everybody became unemployed and so on. There is, it is an attempt also to kind of uplift feminism, but we can uplift feminism without actually exaggerating or eliminating the role of big part of our society, meaning men, which is something that actually colonial feminism and colonial forces are trying to destroy when they speak about what's going on in Gaza, for example. They only speak about women and children. Of course, there is a specific issue at that gender violence is also added to other kind of violence. But violence is also gendered in the sense that it applies to men, it applies to non-gender binary people, it applies to all sorts of ways, because gender is not a static thing. It doesn't equate women. So that's one of, I think, very important issues to think about, that not essentialize women, and not think about it in that sense, that it is gender doesn't equal women, and women are not, we don't have to actually say women became the heads of the household in order for us to actually affirm what Jehan is saying, the role of the Palestinian women. In fact, Jehan is member of the Palestine National Council now, which is not really non-existence basically in the presence of the colonial structure of Oslo, but the General Union of Palestinian Women, which Jehan has been involved in, and which I've been a member of honorary because I've been always abroad and there was never a chapter in the US, was the organization right after the PLO and the Palestine National Council announced that a Palestinian is a person whose father is a Palestinian. General Union of Palestinian Women said Palestinian is a father or mother is a Palestinian. And this became part and parcel of the Palestinian, let's say, normalized life. There's not something that we need to struggle around as Palestinian feminists. And I'm saying feminists, including everybody who supports women's liberation, women, men, children, everybody. So I think that's really important to think about that, to think about the accomplishments, and to also think today, how do we think about Gaza when it is elimination of them, as if men, it's okay to kill men, it's okay to eliminate them, and so on. And it's okay to actually assign to men, and also Palestinian men, but also Arab, Muslim, men of color. This is a story also in the US that has been going on again and again. And I'm not saying in a story in terms of a fictional, it's actually part of the narrative, of the US narrative, in the sense that actually assigns hyper sexuality, assigns rape as if it is part of the DNA, assigns sexual violence, assigns excessive homophobia and sexism to men, to men of color, to Palestinian men, to Arab and Muslim men, as if it's part and parcel of their DNA. And thus it becomes possible to actually accept, like, unfortunately, some feminists, and not only colonial, I'm not talking only about Hillary Clinton or Sandberg or some of these people who have been already established their credentials, how colonial they are again and again and again, and how racist they are as well. But I'm talking about also some people who are actually real anti-colonial feminists who rush to actually believe the Zionist myth that there has been mass rape on October 7 by Palestinians. And it's part of the Israeli tale in order to kind of figure out how can we divert attention from what's going on, the massacre that is going on in Gaza, the genocide, but also the resilience of the Palestinian people, that every single day Israel displaces. Today 1.7 million Palestinians, according to UNICEF, have been displaced from one place to the other. But every single time a road opens up, people go back to their homes, go back to their places, and so on, because they're not going to allow another Nakba to happen. They're not going to allow to be displaced, because in 1948, people left thinking that they're going to be back and the next day, and they left even the food on the stoves and so on. This is part of the narratives of the Nakba that sometimes people dismiss and think of them as really not irrelevant and so on. And I think it's really important to think about that. It's very important to also think about, even to question the Israeli tale of kind of like within a few hours, from 6 in the morning until, I don't know, like 4 in the afternoon, Palestinian men, the only thing they had on their mind was actually to go and basically rape the Israeli colonizers, which continues with the same story of the ways in which black men historically have been accused of desiring and raping white women. And we know the stories are lies, but nonetheless, men have been lynched and have been accused, which to the credit of I.W. Wells, refused to live up with the white supremacist feminist movement and insisted on actually fighting and defending black men against lynching and so on. So this is one of the big issues that actually confronts us today, because people are ready to accept that. So this is the third thing that I wanted to say is in thinking about the whole question of what happened with us. And I want to talk about NWSA. Actually, Jehan was one of the people who was invited to speak at NWSA last November. And then I had to explain when we met in London what happened. Of course, she was very supportive and understanding and so on. But in 2015, after with a resolution at the Milwaukee conference was passed in supporting Palestine as a feminist issue, supporting BDS, refusing to cross the academic picket line, refusing to invest in a regime that's settler, colonial, violent, and so on, exactly the same way that the whole world refused to invest and support South Africa, withdrew from South Africa, as the whole world refused to invest in after, but unfortunately after, in the Holocaust. If they had done enough before, they might have been able to stop the killing of 6 million Jews in Nazi concentration camps. But people say they didn't know. They knew, they were aware of it. And we know many policymakers, including the US, who closed their doors to the Nazis. So the whole question is that there is an attempt to kind of like close this and shut it down. So after 2015, we had some members of NWSA coming out and writing that articles that supporting Palestine is anti-Semitic, and it's something that goes against inclusion and so on. And then in 2016 in particular, because there was the International Women's Strike, created a coalition to have on International Women's Day, which was an alternative to the mainstream white supremacist led, not inclusive, led protest on January 20th to support Hillary Clinton, who lost the elections in favor of the fascist Trump. They did this. International Minister came together, built this incredible coalition, and they had in it, one of the leaders was a Palestinian, Rasmiya Ode. They actually alluded to the question of borders and refused all borders. They alluded to climate justice, and they said people should not be deprived of water and so on. And then we had all sorts of attacks, including somebody who wasn't really known, young kid who, by the name of Emily Shire, writes an article in the New York Times and says, is there a place for Zionism in feminism? And, some people said, no, there isn't. And I want to qualify it and say, there is a place for Zionism in feminism, in colonial feminism. There is no place for Zionism in anti-colonial feminism. There is no place in Zionism for that kind of feminism that resists and rejects colonialism, that rejects exceptionalism on any basis whatsoever, but insist on thinking about how do we think about that. The last point I was asked, how do we teach about that? And I think this is something we will be talking about that later on. How do we think about it? Take every single event and not say the Palestinians, for example, because there are different classes, genders, people live in rural areas, urban areas, and refugee camps. Some Palestinians are inside the 48 areas, some Palestinians are in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, in refugee camps throughout Lebanon, Jordan, throughout the world, in the diaspora and so on. And I think it's really important to kind of like pay attention and not to be lazy intellectually, to think about how can we learn more. And people do not, there are certain things that you don't really, it's not complicated where justice and injustice is concerned. It's not complicated to say US dollars should not be spent, tax dollars should not be spent, not a single penny, to fund killing and murder and militarization. This is a very basic, simple thing. It's not really a difficult thing to say. But I think in terms of kind of like figuring the details and so on, I think scholars and public intellectuals have the responsibility to learn more and do more and engage more. And I'm going to stop at that. Okay, so I think it's my turn next to ask Huwaida question. Thank you so much for joining at the last minute. Alhamdulillah salama also. You've just returned from the flotilla to Gaza, and not immediately, but you've been returned from all your travels. So can you just share with us, with our audience, background about the flotilla, about how did it come together? Why did it come together? There were many flotillas before to break the siege of Gaza, the blockade around Gaza. But how did it, what happened? How did it go? And you participated in previous flotillas as well. This is not the first one. So if you can just speak about this one, but also refer to some of the stuff and what were you trying to accomplish? And if you are able to share with us what's next, if you don't want to share with us because people are still studying, and that's fine, we can talk to you after the next step. So please go ahead, Waida.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rabab. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm speaking to you from the historical and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, Three Fires Confederacy of the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples, otherwise known as Metro Detroit. It is a great honor for me to join such a distinguished panel on the 76th commemoration of the Nakba. I want to first reiterate my gratitude to the conveners, not just for this program and for inviting me, but for all the work that you do. for justice. Dr. Abdel Hadi, to you for your tireless work and perseverance and fierce fight against all of the forces trying to silence you. Deep, deep gratitude to Dr. Heidi Lewis and Christian Contreras for your principled leadership of the National Women's Studies Association. I am honored to be co-chair of this year's conference, but even more excited to witness the growth, development, and power of the NWSA under your leadership. So thank you. I want to answer your question, Dr. Rabab, by first placing the work of the flotilla and a lot of the things that I've done in the past, like the International Solidarity Movement, et cetera, in the context of decades of Palestinian resistance in various forms. So with the International Solidarity Movement, which I was part of co-founding, and then now the Freedom Flotilla, this is like one form of resistance, and it's nonviolent resistance, but I want to emphasize that it is not to criticize or diminish the other forms of Palestinian resistance that have been undertaken over decades, including armed resistance to violent settler colonialism. And as you know, that resistance has historically been and continues to be vilified in a really anti-historical, hypocritical attempt to detract from the legitimacy of the Palestinian struggle, to muddy the waters around a situation that is very clear cut, to say that it's complicated and why don't Palestinians do this or do that, instead of recognizing that throughout history, whenever people have been colonized and brutalized, they are going to resist, and that resistance is going to take on various forms. So one of those forms that I was involved in is the International Solidarity Movement, which was co-founded in the early 2000s, and that was to provide international support for Palestinian popular resistance on the ground, because I was on the ground in the occupied Palestinian territories and seeing with my own eyes that Palestinians resisting, non-violently, as the world tells us to do, were being shot dead, brutalized, maimed, and nobody was ever holding Israel accountable. So with the International Solidarity Movement, we called people from all over the world to come stand with Palestinians in a deep kind of solidarity, to help us report, to go back to their own home countries and tell about what's happening, and to provide a message to Palestinians withstanding this attempt to annihilate them, that they are not alone. We wanted to globalize, if you will, the Intifada. And if there are any Zionists watching or listening, or people who don't know, the Intifada is not synonymous with genocide of the Jews, as you're hearing these days in Congress and from university administrations and other people, again, trying to vilify the Palestinian resistance. Intifada comes from the Palestinian, or the Arabic word intifada, which means to shake off, which Palestinians were shaking off the Israeli occupation, shaking off control of their lives. It is a struggle for liberation, and it is a struggle for freedom. Intifada is about the struggle to be free for everyone. So let me go right to the flotilla. Malak Matar was talking about, when talking about her art and her experience in Palestine, talked about the Israeli military blockade that has been in place since she was a little girl. Of course, Gaza has never really been free. It was under Israeli military occupation since 1967, but in 2007, Israel placed a near hermetic closure on the Gaza Strip, which is only the size of Metro Detroit, with over 2 million people living there. And the closure means strictly controlling everything that goes in and out, which destroyed the Gaza economy, which led to Palestinian deaths, because controlling everything that went in and out, included controlling medicine, controlling medical equipment, denying people the opportunity or permission to leave to seek medical treatment that's not available in Gaza. And the international humanitarian organizations, including the United Nations, were talking about what the effects of this closure, but nobody was doing anything, of course, to force Israel to change policy. And that's when a number of people from the International Solidarity Movement tried to think of what kind of direct action could we do. And the idea came to try to challenge the naval blockade to sail to Gaza. And so in the summer of 2008, 44 people got on 2 small fishing boats to go confront the Israeli Navy, we didn't really think we were going to actually get into Gaza because Israel was vowing to stop us. But we wanted to challenge this illegal policy. It was a form of collective punishment. Collective punishment is a war crime. Yet again, Israel's allowed to get rid of it. And really this kind of impunity over the years, allowing to get Israel to get away with all of these war crimes is what led us to a situation that we have today, where we can see, a live stream genocide for 7 months and not stop Israel, and Israeli soldiers bragging about it because they think they are immune from any kind of accountability. And that is certainly the message that they have been getting from the world, led by the United States, which has provided that impunity. So in 2008, we actually made it to Gaza. Israel backed down at the last minute, and our 2 small fishing boats sailed into the port of Gaza, the first time any boats have ever done that in over 40 years of Israeli military occupation. And I cannot even explain to you the excitement of Palestinians, tens of thousands that came to the port to meet us, not because we were carrying humanitarian aid. We didn't have any humanitarian aid with us, but because they saw people largely from the United States and Europe willing to challenge a cruel, a deadly Israeli policy. And we promised that we would continue to sail until this illegal siege was broken. And we did continue to sail. A few more times we got into Gaza. But then at the end of 2008, when, as Malak mentioned, one of the brutal military assaults, Operation Cast Lead, started on Gaza, Israel attacked our boat, nearly capsized 2 boats, and then another one pirated a boat and arrested everyone on board, which led us to not wanting to back down to this kind of violence. But what do? And what we decided to do was to escalate, and in 2010 organized a flotilla. So we weren't sending like 2 small fishing boats anymore, but rather a 7-ship flotilla carrying 10,000 tons of humanitarian aid. We had cargo ships, we had passenger vessels, we had 700 people from 35 countries around the world. And we set sail to Gaza, insisting on being able to get in. And Israel launched a brutal military assault, and it killed 10 of our volunteers, including a young Turkish American who was executed on board. But as horrific as that was, again, we're not going to let the Israeli violence stop us. And we continue to try to organize this efforts through the years, which brings us to where we are today, which we are organizing an emergency flotilla to, again, break the siege of Gaza. We have right now off the shores of Turkey a cargo ship that is filled with over 5,500 tons of life-saving aid that needs to get to the people of Gaza. We have passenger vessels, and we have hundreds of people from around the world that are ready to sail and who were ready to sail, who were with me in Istanbul the last few weeks. Unfortunately, we were sabotaged, meaning Israeli pressure led to the pulling of our flags. Of course, each vessel that is at sea has to be flagged by a country. And we had some flags of convenience of small countries, but that came under Israeli pressure and then withdrew our flag literally the day we were supposed to sail. So now we are reorganizing. We are working to reflag our ships as fast as we can. Unfortunately, this usually takes weeks, sometimes months, but we hope to keep it to 2 weeks, as we have people working all over the world to reflag those ships so they can take to sea, and that we can insist on reaching the people of Gaza, carrying the life-saving aid. As we know, Israel is deliberately starving the people of Gaza. Dozens of children have already died from malnutrition and dehydration when food and aid is only a couple of miles away. This is inhumane, and yet we don't see, again, anyone doing anything to really stop Israel. You have the United States saying that they're building a pier so that aid can come in via the sea, distracting from the fact that they're doing nothing to make Israel open actually the land borders, which is the quickest, most effective way to get in life-saving aid. But I'll go back and say, while we need to get this aid in, while it is life-saving aid that is important, Palestinians don't want to live on aid. Palestine is not a humanitarian aid or a charity case, as I think everyone watching will know. And so we have to continue the political work that we're doing, and our action is, while we want to get an aid, it's more about challenging the political realities that leave Palestinians in need of aid. So we've had a setback in terms of delayed with the flag issue. We will reflag if Israel thinks it stopped us. It did not. It just set us back a little bit, but we will be back. Just like its previous attacks on us, even the killing of some of our volunteers didn't stop us, just like decades of brutal aggression against Palestinians and Israel's genocidal conduct in Gaza now is not going to stop the Palestinian struggle or kill the will of Palestinians to be free. It's not going to stop those of us around the world who reject colonialism, occupation, racism, all forms of repression. Those of us who refuse to give in to racist, supremacist violence, it's not going to stop us. The hundreds that were with me in Istanbul are back organizing in their countries, so to bring back even more people with us, so that when we do sail, inshallah, in a few weeks, we'll come back even bigger and stronger. And that is one form of resistance that I'm honored to be a part of. But as we all know, resistance is taking place in so many different forms around the world, from the student movements at universities, those speaking up in their workplaces and resisting even at the cost of losing their jobs, of other forms of repression, to students facing down the violence of their universities, the armed forces being sent to brutalize them, and their administrations penalizing them instead of actually listening to them, to the millions marching in the streets, and the Palestinians continuing to insist on life, despite the most powerful military forces in the world inflicting death and destruction, just like they continue to resist those of us who stand with Palestinians in their will to be free. Will continue to resist, and we will sail. I hope I didn't go over too much time. I will stop there. Thank you so much for inviting me again to be part of this really important discussion.
Thank you so much, Hawaida. I think if our viewers could see our private chat, it's just exclamation points and just different affirmations after every one of our featured guests share their perspectives and their resources and their urgings for us to, again, mobilize ourselves with a weaponized consciousness and critique of our investments in the occupation of Palestine and every site of colonial settlement. Oh, excuse me. Woo. But coming back to this, at NWSA, we remain committed to emphasizing in every way, shape, or form that Palestine is a feminist issue and has always been a feminist issue. Earlier in today's conversation, we provided a contextualization of not only why we're having this webinar, this open classroom discussion today on the 76th anniversary of the 1948 Nakba, but to attend to what is very easy for us to do in academia or as scholar activists, which is to live in abstraction. We are discussing and pushing against the very things that Palestinians and so many other folks who live in occupied Palestine and in neighboring areas are living through. We are witnessing a genocide, and we have been witnessing a genocide since 1948, which is a culmination of decades-long resurgences around imperialism and settler colonialism. We're still living with the linkages of power and dispossession. And so with that being said, I want to emphasize a bit of what I think everyone should read, which is Nada Elia's most recent publication, Greater Than the Sum of Our Parts, a reminder that the capacity to survive, even thrive, under the harshest circumstances is a queer, feminist, abolitionist, intersectional, non-binary decolonial practice. So when asked if Palestine is a feminist issue, we answer with a resounding yes. It always has been, it always will be until Palestine is free. Dr. Abdullah Hadi shared a bit about our recommitment struggles. And by struggles, I mean our recommitment efforts. I don't know why I said struggles. And I do want to outline them for everyone who is participating in our call today, but to also lay the foundation for what I hope is an ongoing discussion. In order for us to think about what it means to recommit to the principles of boycott, divestment, sanctions, and Palestine as a feminist issue, we worked with our colleagues and our co-conspirators for this opportunity in Feminists for Justice in for Palestine, which again is a collective based out of NWSA, on a number of promises. And promises are rooted in relationships. And in order for us to have a relationship around the fight for free Palestine, we put the principle and the cause first. And that allows us to build relationships to make possible the following. One, a plenary that we are proud to host at our upcoming 2024 annual conference in Detroit, Michigan, or Waiwanatong, the indigenous name for the city of Metro Detroit. And this plenary focuses on Palestine as a feminist issue, drawing primarily from Palestinian activists, authors, resistors, and every name under the sun for folks that make a new world possible. The second component is making sure that we are able to co-create a delegation to Palestine, to be co-organized with Dr. Abdullah Hadi. And this is a commitment that we have to be confirmed before the end of Dr. Lewis's term as our 22nd president of the association. We are also proud to offer an Institute for Teaching Gender and Sexual Justice in Arab, Muslim, and Palestinian communities as a pre-conference for our upcoming 44th annual conference, again in Metro Detroit. This is one example of a webinar that's focused on Gaza and coalition building that we're organizing in partnership with F4JP, but also more opportunities for discussion and learning and resources. Oftentimes folks come to NWSA because our tagline, or rather our mission, is that we lead the association or we lead the field of women and gender studies. And we cannot do that in good conscience without integrity, without attending to the needs and hurts that our membership and any area where feminist power is made possible is focused on. And of course, that includes Palestine. These series of virtual teach-ins are focused not just on educating and answering the question, what can I do as a witness, as a co-conspirator, as an ally, but to encourage us to ask different questions that mobilize our communities, that put the onus on us in amplifying the long story, decades-long work that Palestinians and activists have been leading for, again, so many years. We would be remiss in not making space for naming our commitment to hosting conversations that live in that space between activism and learning, and offering that conversation through our new podcast series called Feminist Frequencies, which is hosted by myself, as well as featuring oftentimes my other thought partner, Dr. Heidi Lewis, as our association president. We want to make sure that when we talk about recommitment, it is not just platitudes and transactional events, but a shift in our consciousness and how we raise awareness and provide resources to our membership. And so we're very honored, but also privileged through the reparative work that we're able to do with Feminists for Justice in for Palestine and every other Palestinian-led organization that has graciously agreed to support NWSA, but also create more space for learning for our membership. That means at our annual conference, in opportunities like this one, and every other way creatively that we can make space for revolution. I want to turn it over to Dr. Abdullah Hadi to invite her to speak a bit more about the upcoming Institute on Teaching Palestine at our annual conference. And again, making sure that we make very clear that Palestine is always a feminist issue. And at the association, we work to make sure that this is at the core of all sites of struggle and occupation that we choose and are privileged to support in our fight for feminist worlds.
Thank you so much, Dr. Contreras. This is incredible. I mean, I don't know what to say, but I'm going to say something. First of all, I want to just say that we in Feminists for Justice in and for Palestine and all our co-partners, Feminist Solidarity Network for Palestine, that worked very hard and produced that incredible debunking of the New York Times and other colonial feminist work, along with Writers Against the War. It was published all over the place. Go search for it. The collective remains anonymous, but it's an amazing work. And for people in Right to Education campaign at Birzeit University, who actually don't waste any opportunity to repost what we're doing and sharing, National Students for Justice in Palestine, Palestinian Feminist Collective, Palestinian Youth Movement, and many other groups that there will be a People's Forum. I know a lot of people are going to be upset with me because I'm forgetting, but Jewish Voice for Peace and so many partners, and we are CUNY for Palestine. We are going to be able to have in Detroit at the end of the month, there's going to be conferences, and then a big conference on Palestine. So we're inviting everybody. But I want to say that we wanted to say now, as Feminists for Justice in for Palestine, we would like to ask all our members to rejoin NWSA, renew membership, prepare your panels, prepare your workshops, prepare your roundtables. We will all do that collectively right after, because we believe, as you recommit NWSA to its principles, including Justice in for Palestine, we recommit ourselves in the principle of solidarity and working with each other to rejoin and work our best. So the Institute is going to be one day, right before NWSA starts. We had this the first time in Atlanta in 2018. It was only very short, half a day. We tried to have it in San Francisco. We didn't succeed because there were a lot of issues with membership for junior scholars, precarious faculty, graduate students, and so on, and the schedule. But now we're having a whole day. Part of it is to how do people can teach about Palestine. What are the issues that we would like to emphasize when we are teaching courses on Palestine, and when we are teaching other courses that are related to Palestine? How can we make the linkages that are not superficial, that don't conflate context with each other, that actually looks at things in the dialectical, dynamic, organic, internationalist, collaborative solidarity, constitutive solidarity way. So that is one thing. The other thing we actually are going to be talking about is when people do that, what are the ways in which we can come together and have each other's backs? One of the things that made the student, this most recent wave rising of the students' movement that finally the media noticed, because they've been working forever, is it very successful. It's also because they organized before, they planned, they figured out who's going to do what are the risks, how are they going to do it, which things they were going to challenge, what things they're not going to challenge. So this is some of the things that we are actually going to be talking about. We are also asking NWSA, we've talked about it before, about providing a space for to do an academic study, a real academic study, not some of the stuff that designers produce, that's propaganda piece, but real academic study of what members face, what they experience, and how do we analyze, then a study, how do we analyze the quantitative data, how do we analyze the qualitative data, how do we constitute the questionnaire, how do we select the group that will do that, and then also have a body in order to actually prepare support and for the students who are going to be, the faculty who are going to be participating in that. So this is the goal of the Institute, and I'm going to actually leave it back to my colleagues in Feminists for Justice and for Palestine to say whatever, and any other things you want to add.
Thank you, Rabab. I can jump in and say that I'm really grateful to be a witness to this process. It's deeply meaningful to reconnect with the NWSA in this moment when feminist action in Palestine solidarity work is so crucial. As Rabab has been talking about, we're facing a new Zionist and colonial campaign to actually use feminism for state propaganda. And it's I think more crucial than ever that we, as I've been saying and thinking, that we regroup as anti-colonial and anti-racist feminists, and really ensure that going forward we place, as Rabab said, we place Zionist feminism in a history of colonial feminism and in histories of white supremacy that have weaponized, right, the charge of sexual violence in order to advance a racial order. I think that that's a very challenging project to do, and one that I hope that we can actually address together at the Institute, at the NWSA's Palestine Institute, which will take place for a one-day gathering before the conference this year. And I really look forward to seeing folks there. I can say that I myself just completed teaching a class in Palestinian feminisms, transnational feminisms in Palestine, in a small seminar at UC Berkeley. And I'm really looking forward to meeting other feminist scholars and activists who are bringing Palestinian feminist studies alongside other anti-racist and anti-colonial feminist studies into the classroom. We can talk about how to do that together. And also as a Jewish anti-Zionist and as somebody who's in Jewish feminist studies, I hope that we can also regroup around new understandings of Jewish feminist genealogies that lend some strength to Jewish anti-Zionisms that are emerging in feminist, queer, and transgender activists and also scholarly spaces today. So I'm really grateful to the NWSA that we've renewed our partnership and that we're able to continue this crucial work.
Thank you so much, Brooke, Dr. Lorber. I would like to see if we can maybe have the rest of our participants say maybe a minute or a minute and a half each by way of concluding. So I'm going to call on Jihan, on Huwaida, Mary Jo, and then end with Dr. Lewis. So please go ahead, Jihan. You're muted.
Let me see. Okay. Now, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. No, I wanted to say that the most important thing now is this solidarity. I think solidarity is very, very important. This gives us strength, hope, and make us look better for the future. I witnessed the solidarity with the Palestinian women in the 70s, and I always say we are very proud that Palestinian women, in cooperation with women around the world, were able to condemn Zionism as a racist movement in 1975 in Mexico Congress in the Year of Women. This was really fantastic. It showed that women can work together and can really make change. Now I'm very optimistic because I think you could break the borders of complicity and of silencing us and bringing the Palestinian narrative to its roots and to its factual process. I think we can think better of how to do this solidarity. And I'm glad that solidarity it is not only the global south, which is only natural to have solidarity of the global south, but women who are really against colonization, women who are working to decolonize, not only in Israel, to decolonize the universities and the cultural institutions. They are really colonized in a very subtle way, but we are happy that it disappeared now, and people can see why this hegemony of the imperialists, it's not only the military industry, it is the hegemony of fake education, fake culture. So we are optimistic.
Thank you. And we are going to be doing actually more and talk about also the solidarities and the histories of all of these because we have a lot to teach. So I'm going to go next to Huwaida.
Goodness, I don't know if after all these brilliant interventions, there's much more for me to add. Let me just say, I really think the work that you're doing, and especially again with the new leadership of the National Women's Studies Association, it is inspiring because we do need to provide so much kind of history and context because we are up against decades of attempts to really miseducate people, especially Americans, but certainly around the world. And just to give a brief example, last night I was at a talk after an Israeli historian, Alam Pape, gave this, very elaborate and critical talk. You still had someone stand up and regurgitate a lot of the things that we have been hearing and spent decades hearing about how the Palestinians rejected peace and how all these other forces, Iran and Syria and Russia, and again, all detracting from really what is historically documented, what is true, and our government continues to gaslight us. And so we're up against powerful forces and decades of miseducation, decades of propaganda, and current, colonial imperialist interests and all of their resources. But with all of that, I firmly, firmly believe that the mobilization of the people is more powerful, and we will win. So there is that, just for me to express my gratitude, even though personally I'm not in academia. The work that you're doing is so incredibly important. So thank you for this, and thank you for tuning in. And we just keep it up and not let the horrors of what we're seeing bring us down. Because if anything I've learned, and to be truly honest, I don't even understand, but I think we all need to learn from it, is the ability of Palestinians to continue to insist on love and life, despite the fact that for their entire lives, they have witnessed none of it from the international community. All they've witnessed is Israel's brutality and the silence or complacency or active complicity of world governments. But they can distinguish between that and the people, and they insist on love and life. And so let's get hope from that and keep on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Huwaida. I just wanted to say that this is not just academic. We never ever do just academic, because we believe that we have a role as public organic intellectuals in the Gramscian sense, that we need to be involved and produce knowledge to serve justice and to serve the people. I'm going to pass it on to Mary Jo.
I'll be very short. I just want to say it's been an honor to learn from Jehan, Malik, and Huwaida. Thank you so much for sharing space with us and offering us anti-colonial feminist practices of solidarity. You've given us a lot today, and I hope that we all take these practices into our classroom and into the streets. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mary Jo, and then Dr. Klinker. And last but not least, we give it back to our amazing, esteemed leader of the National Women's Studies Association, which is more responsibility than glory, Dr. Heidi Lewis, to close us. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Rabab, all of you. I've learned so much. I've really appreciated sharing the space with you, and I look forward to continuing to do that, not just during my presidential term, but beyond and for all of our lifetimes. I'll just conclude by reading a little bit from the inaugural president's blog that I published entitled Palestine and the Black Radical Intellectual Tradition. While some of my research and teaching is situated in Black transnational feminist traditions, I do not claim to be an expert on Palestine. Rather, as an experienced Black feminist intellectual, I have what my colleague and my friend, Dr. Nadia Gassous, calls a deep and abiding commitment to solidarity, the decolonization of our world, and the liberation of all oppressed people everywhere. My work in this area is indebted to so many of the people that I cite in the piece that I hope you will read and share to the extent possible. But I'll end with this. As a Black feminist, then, where else would I be but here, standing in solidarity with Palestinians fighting for freedom? And as our esteemed Feminists for Justice in and for Palestine chair, Dr. Rabab Abdulati, asks in her essay, Living Under Occupation, how else can justice prevail? Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm sorry I said you will have the last word, but we also did not discuss the case of Dr. Nadir Shalhoub-Kevorkian, who continues to be interrogated and subjected to repression by the Israeli authorities. And we have a petition that we are circulating. We actually invited her to participate with us today. She couldn't for obvious reasons, because she's being prosecuted, and many other people. So just to keep in mind that there is so many things that we are struggling against. Lots of love to everybody. This is the labor of love. We're working with each other. We will be working harder and harder. And it's been an amazing, amazing closure. So thank you to everybody who watched. Thank you to everybody who did. Thank you to all the students. You know, the assignments are coming. So this has been really amazing and lovely and wonderful. And we will send our condolences also to Bir Said for Aysar Safi and our colleague Lina Mahari, who wasn't able to join us, and everybody who fell in the struggle for justice and freedom. And goodbye.